Hello everyone, welcome. I'd just like to begin, first of all, by acknowledging the Wiradjuri people as the traditional custodians of the land and pay my respects to elders past, present and emerging. Sovereignty was never ceded and we live on stolen land. So, welcome to Right Around the Murray. I hope you've been enjoying the festivities. We've got a great program, and not only today, but across the entire weekend. Our panel tonight is Writing for Comedic Performance. My name is Siang Lu. I'm the author of two books, the first of which is called The Whitewash, the second is Ghost Cities. They've both been described as comedic, but in fact, the true comedians are seated right here. Eden Porter, Alyce, Fisher and Dan Phillips. Warm round of applause for everyone. So I will begin my inquisition with Eden. Just quickly, Eden Porter was a contestant and cast member of Australian Survivor Titans vs Rebels, which aired this year. We are in the presence of a celebrity. Eden is one half of the comedy duo The Game Boys. He's winner of the Best Independent Theatre Ensemble 2023 Green Room Award and is a 3-time nominee for Best Comedy at the Melbourne Fringe and many more accolades to boot. Eden, I just want to jump right in and ask you about The Game Boys. So tell me about The Game Boys. I believe it's a comedy duo with your brother, yes. But there is also a green screen element to it that sounds incredibly intriguing, and I've seen pictures and videos of it. Can you tell us a little bit about the outfit?
Yeah, sure. So it's always been really important for me to write with a partner and with someone that has a similar sensibility to myself. And there was no better person than my brother, someone that I'd grown up with, known my whole life. And so once I finished uni, I was out doing some shows and some acting and things like that. And then we just started writing together. And our first show was called Game Boys. And we thought it really encapsulated our comedic style, which was very nostalgia driven. It was very 90s. We wrote a lot about growing up in that sort of 80s, 90s period and experiences that we had that we thought would resonate with our audiences. And from there, we had this sort of flow that was like, okay, well, that's been interesting. And one aspect of it that we really enjoyed was the tech part of it. And so we started to incorporate more and more tech into our shows, to the point that we would have a screen, we would have a TV that could rotate 360 degrees, and that became sort of the third cast member. And it really took the show to another level where we could suddenly do things and incorporate aspects of pop culture that is so visual, and it's like you hear a sound effect and it can take you back to an old ad or an old, you hear that Chicken Tonight theme and you go, oh, I know exactly what that is. And so we use sound effects and things like that to just sort of draw the audience in, to mine that for comedy. And from there, we just started to explore more and more and became more and more interactive, and we started to involve our audience members in our shows as well. So we do a lot of audience participation, but we do it in a nice way, not that scary sort of like, come up here.
That's what we all say.
Which everyone is just like, no. But we purposely write our shows to make the audience feel at ease, and we gradually build them and bring them into the show as we develop it. And that has been a really big part of our writing process as well, is making sure the audience feels really comfortable and we can be in an environment, we create an environment where the audience feels that they can just say something and, oh yeah, I think this, or yeah, I'll jump up, and really become part of the performance itself. So it's been really good.
Can you tell me a little bit about the process of building a show that incorporates so much green screen, sound effects and all of the multimedia element to that?
Yeah. So you can have all the whiz-bangery in the world, but if you don't have sort of that really great idea, it's not just funny on its own. So for us, the tech always elevated the work. So we still needed that really key idea, but it did open up a lot of doors. We do a lot of things about film and television, and one good example is we played a game of Who Wants to Be a Studio Executive, which was based on Who Wants to Be a Millionaire. And we would get people in the audience. But what was great, we could have the whole theme song come up on screen. And then the idea of the game was you would have to, there'd be two films would come up, very similar films. You'll probably notice when you start looking at it, throughout history, there's usually two very similar films come out at the same time. So for us, we had like A Bug's Life and Ants, or Deep Impact and Armageddon, and Finding Nemo and Shark's Tale. And the audience would have to decide which one made the biggest box office, and they would lock in the answer. But we could have that all on screen behind us, and which one they chose, and it really elevates the material to a new level. And so doing things like that was really fun, and incorporating like our favourite TV shows and theme songs, but still having that element where the audience, we have parts of the show where the audience can actually like touch the screen and it will impact the show, or they'll select something or things like that, which is really fun. And then green screen, you can just get transported anywhere. So for us, we could put ourselves into movies that we really liked, or we could do little scenes where we interacted with each other. And it can get really intense when we did one scene it was green screen, but my brother Josh was wearing a green suit on stage, and then we would project me onto his suit, talking to him through his suit. So you can get quite meta with a lot of the technology that we can use these days, which is really fun.
That's absolutely incredible. I have to see that. Dan Phillips, you were just telling me in the green room that you did an 8-hour round trip to Melbourne Comedy Fest. Was that right? And suffice to say that comedy means a lot to you. Dan's an Albury comic who got into stand-up comedy almost by accident. I'm intrigued. Can you tell us about the story?
So basically one night after dinner, put on Netflix, trying to decide what to watch, came across a comedy, Bert Kushner, The Machine, and saw this middle-aged man.
Is that the Russian story? I love that one, yeah.
He walks out on stage, no shirt, hairy chest, told stories about his past, high school, that sort of thing. And I thought, I could do that.
The hairy chest?
Take your shirt off.
And basically the phones are always listening. The next day, Facebook said, here's some events you might like. And that day was a comedy workshop in Albury happening like 2 hours later. I'm like, I'll go along to that.
Love it. Kismet. And what did you learn at that workshop?
So the comedy workshop was run by Jade Fitzgerald, who's in the audience.
Over there.
And I had never actually heard my voice behind a microphone before. So first thing she did, she gave me a microphone and said, have a go speaking about that. And then the next thing, she'd gone to the Woolworths and bought a bunch of the odd fruit and gave us each one of those and said, write a joke about this. Just because of the shape or how it looked, and sort of, you wouldn't think, how can you come up with something like that? But it sort of engaged your mind to go, right, what's distinctive about this that's funny? And, you know, everyone wants a banana or a cucumber or something like that. But you just get what you're given and try and go from there.
What fruit did you get?
I think I got a cucumber.
Inherently funny. That actually reminds me of a note that I had in my notes about the practice of writing, you know, the discipline of it, and sort of sitting down at the blank page to actually come up with material. Sounds like you've got a great mentor in you. And this bit came from Jerry Seinfeld by way of Mark Normand. He said that the best piece of advice that Jerry Seinfeld gave him was, nobody likes to write, but if you turn off the TV, put the phone away, stare at an idea that you think is funny, your brain will get so miserable that you'll have to crack the code on it. And I'm going to butcher this joke, but I'll tell it anyway. Mark's example from Jerry's quote was about golf, obviously. Golf, I don't understand golf. You guys know why. You know why guys golf? Because they need to be alone. That's what golf stands for. Go out, leave family. And Mark's point was like, that is one, brilliant, but could only come out of a mind that was just so bored, like over the course of 3 hours looking at the page, like, what's funny about golf? So that really just triggered that sort of thought, but thank you. And let's go to Alyce Fisher. Alyce, a country girl at heart, who grew up a pony club prize winner, cow pat frisbee slinger.
Yeah.
Alyce Fisher is known for getting herself into some interesting situations. Quick-witted and reliably rambunctious, Alyce's personal creative focus is on sharing stories and making the people laugh through the development of solo performance work, stand-up comedy, bingo calling, and MC duties.
Yes.
Alyce, can you tell us a little bit about your one human show,
Yes.
Tinderella, and the 8 unique uses of Tinder?
Currently touring around regional Australia to a venue not anywhere near you. Yes, so Tinderella came about because in 2017 I moved to Albury Wodonga, and I'd been living in London, and I had been dating a guy over there, and we broke up because we weren't going to do the long distance thing, and I just went mad for Tinder, and as a way to move on from that relationship, and in doing so I invented a whole bunch of unique ways of using the app, including things like getting a Tinder date to put my bins out for me. Or not a Tinder date, just a Tinder match. A Tinder match to put my bins out for me. I made a guy deliver me pizza that he had bought for himself to my office one night because I was hungry. And then I was like, it's okay, you can go now. What else did I do? I got a guy to put together flat pack furniture for me. All sorts of creative ways of using the app. And then I was experimenting. Then one night I was regaling a group of people with the stories, and Ioana Falk, a famous drag queen in town, anointed me with the title. She goes, "You are Tinderella," and so that's sort of where it came from. And then I used to experiment with the story with stand-up, and if I sort of had to fill a bit of a spot when I was emceeing something, but it just wasn't really working. So then I gave myself the challenge of turning it into a 50-minute show, and now I have, and it's on tour, which is very exciting.
And Alyce, there's like a connection between you and Eden here, where there's sort of a stagecraft to the shows that you put on. So can you talk a little bit about that, the cabaret elements?
Yeah, well, I come from a theatre background, so I sort of, I guess, I found myself and my voice in the amateur theatre world of northern Victoria, in a little dairy farming country town called Umurka. This is where I grew up. And then I went to uni in Melbourne and studied theatre arts, and then I, like everyone, leave uni and was like, I know everything about everything. And then my first year out, I realised I didn't really know much at all. But I think something that I've really seen, and I don't know whether any of you have similar experiences, where your peers who waited for opportunities to come versus the route that I took, which was just make my own opportunities, and the differences between how our careers have evolved or how our craft has evolved. So I guess I describe myself as quite scrappy in terms of my style. But I'm very tenacious, and I also have a habit of making things bigger and more complex than they need to be from a tech element. Not as complex as you, though, Eden. And and I guess I just love theatre, and I love making people laugh, and I love sharing stories, and I just love the character development that you can do and the journey that you can take an audience on, and it's just glorious.
Excellent. One of my favourite comedians, Nate Bargatze, says that in comedy you either make it when you're 20 or when you're 40.
Yeah.
Mm-hmm. How true is that in your experience? No one has to share ages.
Well, I'm creeping closer to 40, so I'm really hoping that starts to skyrocket from that point. I think that's really, really true if you look at the landscape of who's popular.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Well, I think I spent a lot of time going to auditions
Yeah.
and trying to get that external sort of
Jobs
jobs and stuff. And then it wasn't until later on that I said, you know what, I can't wait around for this. I just have to start writing my own stuff. And then, like, I'm definitely going to get that because I wrote it.
Yeah.
And I'm going to be in it.
Yeah.
So that's when we started creating
and self-producing
stuff.
it.
And And so then at that point it was like, well, this is sort of working. Like, you can do this. But it is about having that confidence to just start. Just do it.
Do it, yeah.
Just do it. Yeah.
I'd love to ask a question of all of you, starting with Dan. Just very basically, what does your comedy writing process look like?
Basically, I start off with an idea that I find something, maybe someone said to me like, hey, remember that thing you did in high school? And I'm like, let's not talk about that. Something I might overhear, something I might see, and then I'll let it sit in my head for a couple of weeks, just churning, adding bits and pieces, moving things around before I'll actually sit down and actually start writing. Because I've found when I find I have an idea and I sit there and I write everything just from that one idea, it's usually not good. But when I let it sit there and I'll think about it, I might try a couple of bits on stage and then go back and refine them. Then I'll sit down and I'll actually plot it out point by point, how I want it to sound and all that. So usually I might see something and think of something. My worst problem is I'll think of something at 10:30 as I'm going to sleep and I'm like, I'll remember that. And then 3 weeks later I'm like, oh, that's what it was.
And I'm really fascinated by that audience element to it, or that feedback. Is that like a critical element for you when you write a joke, get up on stage, tell that joke, and get the feedback, and sort of does that inform the rewrites and how you sort of tweak that joke?
A lot of it when I started was I would get up on stage, I'd do 3 to 5 minutes, I'd get off stage and not remember a thing I said. So it's usually people coming up to me afterwards and going, oh, I love this bit, or that was so funny, or maybe not say that on stage. But nowadays I will go up and do 2 or 3 shows where I'll try it and maybe refine it a little bit, change the wording, something like that, before I sort of settle on if it's any good or not. And you hear a lot of professional comedians and big time names, they'll start out, they'll do 4 or 5 shows doing that material before they decide whether to keep it or scrap it, because an audience on one night might love it, another night not. And then they might bring it back 2 or 3 years later, or never again. So it's sort of hard to gauge on the night unless it's extremely funny and everyone's in on it, and it's a memorable thing that people come up and talk to you about afterwards. Yeah.
His name is a little verboten in comedy circles now, but I have heard of pretty amazing advice from Louis C.K., who once said that the thing that he does with new shows, writing a new hour, which was really his thing, was to begin with his closer, so his strongest material. And that was a way to sort of paint himself into the corner and say, well, this is the thing that you thought was the best. Now, that was going to end the show. Now you're going to start with it. Now what? Does that ring true to any of you, or do you want to hold back a little, something special for the closer?
Well, I find usually because I'm only working on 3 to 5 minutes of stage time, I try and work on the first 10 to 30 seconds. The one to engage the audience, make them go, okay, we're ready to laugh. And then I struggle sometimes at the back end of how to finish it up, because I like to write, and there's so much material. All right, where do you end it? Okay, what's going to give you the biggest memorable moment that people will think about when you go back? So. And
just following on from that, can you tell us a little bit about the tricks that you use, or the tools and techniques to actually ease audiences into getting ready to laugh?
I'll quote one of the local comedians. He's Big Russ. He has a joke where he starts out and says, one of the common things or understanding in comedy is that you want to start out with something so common, so universal, accepted that everyone sees you as someone they know or sees them as themselves. So he says, don't you hate it when you're, floating through space on the International Space Station? But it is really good advice because when people come to a show, we're trying to show them an experience, something that happened to us, but we want them to understand it could be something that happened to them. If you went and saw Jerry Seinfeld, he's selling out big stadiums. He says, I was in this cafe and they mispronounced my name. 90% of the people in there would have had that experience. So trying to find something that's in my idea that is common, that most people would understand or would understand where I'm coming from and see themselves in that situation, makes it more relatable and also funnier.
Absolutely, great advice. Alyce, your writing comedy process, please.
Well, I wrote Tinderella when my daughter was going through a massive sleep regression. So I found that between the hours of 1 a.m. and 6 a.m. was my because I was so delirious and angry at her that I could just pour it into my writing. Just watch her on the monitor, not asleep, But I don't know. I can't write without a deadline. I just can't do it. So if I have a deadline, I can absolutely amaze myself in what I can produce. But if I have to think about it for too long, nothing happens, and it's a note on my phone and it doesn't go anywhere.
Eden, I saw you nodding.
I'm the same. I was terrible. Exams, night before study, shows. Unless we're booked in for a festival and we know the end point, it's very hard to just be chipping away at it.
Yeah. I was actually speaking to a comedian who has all of his tours booked, his dates booked for including the Edinburgh Fringe. And he doesn't have a show,
Yeah.
Is that? I was shocked, but that seems pretty normal.
That's also just admin. You've got to get the admin in
so comedy is
early,
admin.
and you don't know what your show is yet.
Well, sometimes a lot of people you can create something in one festival and have the idea, and then you build on it, and then by the next festival you've got a bit more to it, and then by the next one and then you do this circuit, and then by the third or fourth festival you've got this finished show. But then maybe you take that to Edinburgh, but it is sort of a building block process.
I'll have the two questions for you then. First is the same as before, your writing process, and then let's talk a little bit about that circuit because I'm fascinated.
So my process is a little different because our show, we don't do stand-up per se, we do sort of sketch-based comedy. And so for us, it's about coming up with a good framework for a 50, 60-minute show. So if we come up with that framework, then we can start hanging all our little jokes and scenes and sketches on that framework. So for us, it's about sitting down, okay, what do we want, what ideas do we want to tap into, and whether or not we did one all about cinematic universes. We did one about what if the Olympics is taken over by video games. We did one based on getting sucked into a movie and things like that. We did one recently on AI, the concept of that. So you have this broad overall concept, and then you start building, okay, what's a sketch and how does that fit into this? And then you start hanging it all together, and then before you know it, you're like, oh yeah, that works here, and I can move this bit here. But for us, a lot of it is getting up together, obviously with my brother, and just start doing scenes and physicalising stuff. We're not great at
improvising it out.
We're not great at sitting down at a keyboard and just writing everything out. But if we go, okay, we want to do a scene about being a Foley artist and making sound effects for movies. Okay, let's just get up and do it. So we'll get up and we'll just start, and then that'll work. And remember that. And then we start to sort of piece things together about what we find funny. And a lot of the time, if it's making us laugh in rehearsal, that'll be a good sign to be like, there's something there. Let's drill down on that. And then once you've got that framework and you started at a festival, it is still a process of tweaking and what's working, who's responding to what, and so the show will be alive the whole time, and it's still being built as we're performing it.
That's absolutely fascinating, because there's an element of your show that is, I imagine, not very movable, which is the green screen and all the pre-recorded effects.
Yeah.
So what do you mean when you talk about sort of rewriting and tweaking the show?
Yeah, our third member, our tech head, absolutely hates it when we get to a point and we're like, you know what, that whole thing that you spent weeks and weeks creating, that's not working. So we need to change that. And often he will be, between a show finishing one night and us performing the next day, we'll say, hey, we've got to change this tech cue, or we've got to change this song, or we've got to change this visual, and he'll be there madly creating something new for the next show. And it is that instant feedback with the audience. Like, if they're not getting it, something is missing, and we need to make it clearer. Or maybe take something away. So, like, there's a thing you talk about is kill your darlings. And maybe there's a joke that you love, that you find so funny, but it's just not resonating, or it's just not quite working. And you could spend hours and hours trying to retool it, but at some point you just go, you know what, we really like that joke, but it's not working. Let's just kill it and move on, and we'll try and replace that. We'll try and do something else with it.
So hard to let it go.
I know. But use it for another show down the line.
And when you bring a director into the mix too, and then they start killing your jokes, that's really tough.
Really tough.
Oh, let's go there.
It's tough.
Tell us about the directing.
Well, I mean, I think, as I assume, Eden, you self-produce as well, but you get to a point and you do need that external eye to see your work and to tell you what's working and what's not working. And then it is essentially like handing over your child, your baby, and then they're going to go start putting red slashes through things, and, you just end up in these massive arguments with these people that you have begged to come and critique you, and then you fight with them about it. But that's all part of the process. And so the key is to find that person that you can have that full-on argument with, and then you can both go, yeah, all right, fine, we'll do it. Or you can argue with them enough that they let you keep it. Which is so weird. You're like begging them to let you keep your own work that they don't actually own. Anyway, but yeah, I've been in heaps of situations where that's happened, and particularly with Tinderella. And there was this whole section that I was gung-ho about keeping, and it got slashed. And now it's like, yeah, it actually does work a lot better without it. And I can use that piece in another scenario, that's okay. But yeah, you got to mourn it and accept it and move on. And then I think until you start getting that bigger audience, that sort of, I guess, so how my director sees it, she goes, you've got to go macro over micro, because I get really caught in the micro. And then when you start getting those macro laughs and that sort of like audience, huge, big applause and all that, you feel it, you go, oh yeah, that was the right move. Yeah.
So just at soundcheck, Dan and I were relating as introverts, and two of you, I correctly guessed, were extroverts. I want to ask each of you whether or not you think that the particular thing that you have is helpful for your comedy. Dan?
I find I like interacting with people, even though, as I said, I hate all people. Just everyone. I prefer not to leave the house. But when I go out, I find once I get on stage, I get that energy, and then afterwards I'm still running on that. So interacting with people afterwards and, asking, did you have a great time and all that. But eventually I'll get to a point where I'm like, okay, I need to go and take some time to myself and then think about it. And I guess that's why I struggle with doing crowd work, because I overthink. If I ask you this question and you answer me in a way I'm not expecting, well, that's going to derail me completely. So I try and avoid that sort of situation. But I also like getting the feedback from people. You know, people that come along to shows and they like to laugh, but they don't have that critical eye of, oh, if you change these couple of words around, it's going to be so much funny. You just have someone come up and go, I loved all of your jokes tonight. That gives you that feedback, and you're like, okay, I can do another 5 minutes dealing with people.
The reason why I asked this question is because a couple of months back, I was at Bellingen Writers Festival, and I got to meet Paul McDermott. He was actually not on the program, but he's a friend of the festival. Someone had to pull out, and then they just had Paul McDermott on speed dial.
What a ring-in.
He was like, yeah, exactly. And we were all way more excited. And it was honestly a really unexpectedly moving experience for me, because I hadn't thought about the guy for about, 10 or 20 years. And sitting in the audience, watching him just charm the audience, and remembering, we were talking about nostalgia, just being having all those memories rush back. It was incredible. And one thing that he did say that really struck a chord with me was that he's actually incredibly, deeply introverted. And he said that people can be quite disappointed when they meet him because they expect him to be this ball of energy, and he's in fact quite withdrawn. One thing that really struck with me that I wrote down was that he said that there's a truer part of him that lives on the stage, and that part of me is a monster. Alyce, you are nodding. Please tell me about that monster.
Oh, yeah. Well, I'm an extrovert, so I'm actually sucking energy from you all right now, and I need that to survive. Actually really struggled in COVID, and I wasn't sure, and I really thought, I'm going to use this time to write, and I'm going to do all these things. And I couldn't write, and obviously because I didn't all have a deadline, but also because I just wasn't getting that external energy. And the human that I was living with at the time, I remember saying to him, I was like, you're not enough! I can't suck enough energy from you. Anyway, it was quite funny because he's an introvert, and so he was like, please just go away. He actually kept coming up with these ideas of hey, let's spend a whole day where we don't talk to one another. And I was like, no. But yes, I'm an extrovert in my life, and I'm an extrovert on stage. I love audience participation and interaction. I really thrive on it. As much as my show is scripted, there is so many pockets. It sounds really similar to Eden, where you where you can just be if you get that offer from the audience or you get that opportunity, you're like, right, we're going in that direction and we're just going to run with that.
And how do you know?
If it's a vibe. Yeah.
It's all about the vibe.
It's all about the vibes. Yeah. And then there's also some audience members where you're like, we're definitely not going down that track and we're not making eye contact with that person, and we can't encourage that as well. But yeah, I think you've got to... I try to start my shows in the audience. So interaction right from the get-go, and that also sort of diffuses a lot of that tension and gets them to relax a bit more, and they're like, okay, cool, this is... And also start how you mean to go on. I want them to get up on stage with me and be involved with me, so if I'm down there with them, it sort of helps to bring them up.
We do exactly the thing,
yeah, we're very similar. Where was I going with that? Anyway, yeah, so I suck all my energy from the audience, and I come up on stage and I perform the show. Yeah, does that answer the question?
Absolutely. And Eden, it sounds like you do something similar?
Yeah, very much so. And it's interesting with my brother, he's a bit more introverted, and being a sort of a double act on stage, it works quite well. So if there's any wacky characters, I tend to fall into that, and then the straight man roles, so you have someone to bounce off, so he'll fall more into that category. And that works quite well for our dynamic on stage. But we'll do similar stuff where, for the audience participation, we'll do baby steps. So the first thing we might ask the audience to do is just yell out some ideas or questions, and they're very comfortable with that. And then a few sketches along, then there may be, okay, we need a few people to come up on stage. And so you've got buddies in support. Yeah. And then by the end of the show, then we can get someone to come up on stage with us by themselves and recreate the whole movie Jurassic Park with us on stage, and they feel comfortable and confident to do that, because we've sort of crept throughout the show and given them confidence and know that we're going to look after you. You're not going to be the butt of the joke. You're going to be the hero. And then for us, a lot of our writing is we make any audience participation stuff that we do, we make them the hero. We give them the good punchline. So they feel like we'll write a sketch where no matter what they say, it'll get a good response. So they feel good about it, and you can really sort of start like building that interaction, and it's great. Yeah, it's great energy for the show.
I'm getting tingles just thinking about that. That's so warm and generous, and it's such a great way to include the audience and get that participation going. Just having people feel safe and included, and just like you say, the hero of the story, which is awesome.
And you learn really quickly too, especially when you start in the audience, about who's open.
Yes.
And they become, certain audience members become more open as the show, because I have, in Tinderella, there's quite a penultimate audience participation opportunity, and I pick that person really early, and then I work on them throughout the show until the point of which that they come up on stage, and basically we perform a very safe sexual act together.
Oh.
Yes.
And
in 2 life-size condom costumes.
please tell us more about the life-size condom.
Well, I actually got the 2 life-size condom costumes made, I think in 2006, 2007.
Wow.
Yeah, so they're vintage now. But
Blow the dust off.
they're going really well. I spent a lot of money on them, so they're withstanding the test of
Suffice to
time.
say, they'll show up in every show you do.
They do. Oh yeah. They've definitely paid for themselves, those ones. But I used to teach sexual health education through the power of comedy. So I used to go around to universities with a show called. So my company's name's Theatre on Toast. So it's called Theatre on Toast presents Why You Should Wear a Dinger Franger Rubber. And we had pockets built into the condom costumes, which we used to stuff with condoms and give them out at uni open days or things like that. And so now those condoms are in the show, and there's a sequence where a voiceover says, everyone thinks that Tinder is just about the sex, so I give you the sex. And so I come out in a rainbow-coloured condom, and I dance through the audience, and I select my human, and then they come up on stage with me, and I put a flesh-coloured condom on them, and then we simulate a sexual experience together with a fantastic soundtrack. And then the absolute comedy of it is removing the condoms. It's beautiful.
Sounds good.
It's so awkward. But yeah, we just make a really big thing out of it, and it's it's really beautiful and lovely.
And you were talking about the vibe before.
Yes.
Suffice to say that particular audience member
Yes.
that you sort of have an eye on is very vibes-based.
Oh, yeah.
But has that ever backfired on you, where you sort of got the wrong vibe and they really didn't want to be involved, or...?
No, but I did have an experience just the other day when I was on tour in Tamworth. And I had picked this guy. I was like, you are it. You've just got this condom dance all over your face. Like, this is for you. And he left. It was in this basement bar, and I had asked that the bar be closed during the show, but they hadn't been closed by. Anyway, he went up. Turns out he had just stopped doing Dry July, so it was on the 1st of August, and so he was going up for his 5th, 6th drink, whatever, at that stage. And so he went up and got another jug of beer right at the moment that I needed to bring him up, and I was like, oh, and then you have to be like, who was my second? And I was like, had I picked a second? I'm not quite sure, but you just had to sort of go with your gut and end up grabbing someone, and she actually did a really good job. So turns out she was a member of the local amateur theatre society, so I did pick well. Kindred spirit, thank you.
And so what's going on in your mind as that's happening? Is it like pure panic?
Oh, yeah.
Or you sort of, okay.
Oh, yeah. Big time panic. Because I was like, how dare you? And then at the end, actually, I said to him, you were meant to be. And he goes, oh, I knew it!
I feel like
The vibe.
So, yeah. So, anyway, but yeah, we had a big chat afterwards. But yeah, you don't Yeah, and I've been in a Sam Simmons show as well, another comedian who I love, and in Edinburgh actually, and he had been working on this one particular person in the front row the whole show, and you could see it was building, and then she left, like 1 minute before the
big...
And he just said it to the audience. He goes, "You can't." And it was like I just had to watch him scramble and watch him rebuild that whole sequence that he had been working on, which was beautiful for me as a comedian to watch that and go, right, how are you going to handle this situation?
Sort of controlled chaos in a way, yeah.
Which is his whole show.
There is a fine line between audience members that are engaged and audience members that then try and take over or have maybe had a bit too much to drink or anything like that. So you need to build stuff in a way that audience members innately know what's required of them. Like I know we did a scene where we have an audience member do the voice, the sound effects, like a Foley artist thing, and we choose someone that we think is engaged, that's up for it, and then very quickly there was one night where we realised this person they were engaged, but they were engaged because they were engaging with a few drinks, and then it did start to derail, and then they're just making nonsensical noises and starting to swear and stuff like that, and then very quickly we need to abort and be like, okay, thanks, you've had your go, now we're just going to pass it along and just try and do that. So there is a line between people that are engaged and wanting to contribute and maybe a bit too much, and it's trying to balance that.
Without breathalyzing them on the way in.
Eden, you were talking about the circuit. So can you tell us a little bit about what that circuit looks like, how you build around it and for it?
Yeah. So a lot of people in the comedy world will start at the Perth Fringe Festival, and a lot of people,
in January.
Which is in January, yeah, and that will be a very fresh sort of raw show, and a lot of people use that ground to just come up with an idea and build on it, and then you'll take that to Adelaide Fringe, which is one of the biggest fringe festivals in the world, and then you build the show a bit more, and then that finishes and you come to the Melbourne Comedy Festival, and then by that point you've got a really good grounding of what your show is, and it's a really good opportunity. The Melbourne Comedy Festival's huge, enormous, and then it can take up to Sydney, and then after Sydney comes Brisbane, then you can go over to Wellington, to New Zealand, and then it's off to Edinburgh, then you take the show to Edinburgh, and then you can come back through Montreal, and then by that time then you're sort of back to Perth, and then you go, okay, time to make a new show. But by the end of that journey, each festival, you're really only making enough money to pay for your next festival. So it's just airfares and accommodation for the next one. You get there, you do that, and it is just this cycle, and you can fall into that cycle for...
And if you jump out of that cycle, it's very hard to get back into that cycle.
Yeah.
Why is that?
Money. Yeah, and also like once you've missed one festival's deadline for entry, you're sort of just scrambling. I've never made the big leap to do the whole thing. It just terrifies me.
Yeah, it's a lot.
And now I have a kid, so it's like
that's
impossible.
Yeah.
That's why you should do it in your 20s.
Oh well, now that we're in our 40s, we're all hitting success.
I'm not quite there yet. On the cusp.
I was thinking about this as I was sort of putting together the questions, that as a real big fan of comedy myself, the reason why I love it is because when it works, that's the big caveat, when it works, it seems kind of like a perfect circle of endorphins, by which I mean you get on stage and tell a joke, and then the crowd laughs because they're getting joy from something you thought of, but then you feel great because they've responded in the way that you hope. And I was kind of just sitting there in this idealized world going, wow, comedy's so amazing, without realizing until like a week later, there's the opposite perfect circle of that, where you just completely bomb.
Yes.
And so I want to go there a little bit. Do we all have sort of horrible, scarring experiences, open mics, or anything like that? And if we do, why have you returned to comedy?
Well, my first show was about a week after the workshop that I did, and we were supposed to catch up sometime before that, but, time and life got in the way. So I turned up to the show to just watch to see what it was like, my first probably live local comedy show. And as I'm walking in, Jade's on the door and she goes, "Oh, you don't have to pay, you're on in the second half." And I'd spent the week writing, not actually writing anything that would work together. So I'm like, okay, I've got 20 minutes, I'd say, to put together 2 minutes of material. And I did jokes about kids and work and all that. And you're right, I got the laughs and I got that endorphins. I got off and I'm like, I am so good. And then I think it was 2 or 3 months later, I got on stage for the second show and I went second. And the first comedian, it was his first ever show. He had the crowd in tears. Everyone loved it. And it's a Friday night about 8, 9 o'clock. I've gotten up, I'm talking about stuff I do for work and things I like to do outside of work, and everyone's like, we don't want to talk about that. So I got about 3.5 minutes in and I said, okay, well, I guess I'm off, and got nothing. As I said, okay, I'm done, and some lady in the crowd goes, good.
Oh,
Brutal.
So I got off, and it was at that stage where I still wasn't remembering everything I was saying, just sort of how the room was feeling. So I'm like, okay, I need to go and work on what I was talking about. I need to go and find some material or write something. I didn't feel like I'm a complete failure, I can never do this again. I took the feedback that I didn't have the right material at that time. And depending on your audiences, you might have a really great show, an average show, a great show, and you're doing the same material at the same time, but every night will be different, and it all depends on your audience, how they're feeling and how they're reacting to you. So
I see the both of you kind of nodding at that, and I'm feeling like I'm nodding as well, but I don't get it. Like, the material stays the same.
Yeah.
But what is it, other than the vibe,
It's all about the vibes, man.
that makes each show different? Like, what is it about the audio, the environment, or
Well,
can you tell us a
sometimes
little
you're
bit?
in a bit of a funk, and it might be the same jokes, but how you deliver it, like your tone might be a bit off, or your rhythm might be a bit off, you're just a bit off, or the person that was on before you, like I've had it where, like their material and the way that they delivered it was just so different to what you were about to do, and you choke because of the contrast, and whether or not it would have stood up, you don't know, but you just have the wrong material on for you for the wrong day. Like,
I find sometimes during the week shows, people will have lower expectations and they'll just come and it'll be really fun. Some of the hardest crowds I've ever had were Friday night crowds where they just sit there going, okay, this is my Friday night, be funny. Come on, be funny. And there's this sort of like, this is my Friday night, this is what I'm doing, I'm choosing to be here, now you have to perform. Whereas a Wednesday night crowd might just be after work, let's just go see this, oh, we're all here to have a laugh. And so it can be little things like that. Or it can be like, if you approach a joke and then that one doesn't hit, and then suddenly you're in your own head.
Yeah.
And then maybe you try harder on the next joke because I want to really make it hit. And I have a thing where, and our director sort of tells me a lot, if I don't get that response, I start going bigger and bigger. And then by halfway through, I'm doing all this and I'm desperate to try and get something, and you just can't do that. You've got to rely on the material and no, that doesn't work, but let's just keep it at this level, because if you keep trying and trying, that desperation is palpable in the audience, and it creates a barrier there because you just want them to laugh so bad. And so you've got to trust your material and try and step back and be like, no, I'm just going to keep doing it how we've been doing it, and hopefully that connection will come.
yeah, and sometimes you just need to call it early and just be like, thanks everyone.
Well,
See you later.
Sometimes acknowledging
that
the
it's not going
vibe
great.
can then turn the people
True,
around.
true.
It can be like, hey guys, are we not feeling this tonight? Like, and just articulating
Yeah.
it, and then you can find something in there. And we had one show where the tech died about 15 minutes in, and
I thought you meant the tech died, but you
oh
meant
no, our tech was
died.
fine.
Yeah.
But the tech
was like,
died.
Yeah.
And so much of the show relies on that happening, and so we did have to just stop the show. And we just started riffing with the audience and doing crowd work and stuff, and it kept going and going. And we're like, hey, do we want to keep trying to do the show? And our tech was like, we cannot do this show without this tech, so I'm going to need to finish. And then I just started, this is halfway through a comedy show, I'm just like, it's cool, does anyone have any questions about Survivor? And then we just started doing
Survivor Q&A.
Survivor Q&A halfway through, and then the audience got into that, and then we just started talking to people like, okay, what are you doing tonight and everything. And we kept that energy, and then we did get the tech back up and running. And then for the rest of the show, every time there was a tech thing, everyone would be like, it works, and they got around it and stuff, which was really fun. So yeah, things like that can happen as well. Yeah.
So Eden, I do want to go to Survivor, in fact. Give me the perfect segue. But you strike me as sort of the quintessential super fan, not only of Survivor, but of pretty much everything that you bring your comedy mind to. Looking at all of your shows, they're based on 90s game shows, nostalgia. But then I came to know, and then I immediately was like, let me not like go down this rabbit hole so I can ask you on stage. It seemed that you have almost like an encyclopedic knowledge of Survivor, which is maybe how you got into the show. Can you talk a little bit about that?
Yeah, when I start liking something, I really start liking it, and I go pretty deep. And so for a show like Survivor that I'd been watching since I was 16, back in 2000, it was something that I had always been quite obsessed with. And it was quite funny when we were on the show and we got cast. There were other people on my season that enjoyed Survivor, and they were like, oh, I'm a big fan. And then we would start talking, and they would realise, oh no, wait, you're being cast as the fan, you really know your stuff. And it got to a little bit of an obsession. Like, I started visiting filming locations around the world that the seasons had gone to, and I collated everyone's strategies and things like that. So I got very, very deep into it. And that often happens if there's something that I'm really enjoying, I go all in. And so if we're doing a comedy show, we really go down that rabbit hole of, okay, let's just watch all of the old 90s game shows and become obsessed with them and do that. And so for me to then be able to get on Survivor and share that sort of nerddom with everyone and express that and have that celebrated was really fun.
Did having that encyclopedic knowledge of what happened in various seasons help you strategically?
A little bit. I went in there with like my top 10 pillars of winning Survivor based on previous winners and everything that had happened. And so that gave me a good groundwork when I was starving and not sleeping to go back to and be like, these are my top 10 things that I need to make sure I keep accomplishing and keep thinking about. But it's a show.
Spoiler alert, Eden was eliminated from Survivor, so...
Yeah, so don't follow all my tactics. But in saying that, it's a game of relationships, and it's all about forming relationships with people. And luckily enough, I had done a lot of that with audience members and very quickly trying to build relationships with audience members and stuff. And so that really did, that held me in good esteem when I was on the show, because you need to make connections so quickly, and it can just be about one little thing, but you can grab onto that and be like, oh, what, did you do this? Oh, do you like that? What's your favourite film? Oh my God, I love that too, rah, rah. And you build relationships based on that. So a lot of my comedy work did help in that relationship building aspect, yeah.
And does Survivor and your next show play like any relationship? Are you planning on...
There's elements we've done sort of elements of reality TV shows, and we've got a little bit of Survivor in there. We've got a little bit of Love Island and The Bachelor and things like that. We do in our last show, there's quite a good scene that we do where we play the Bachelor, and I'm the Bachelor, but the audience members are all the other contestants.
Yes.
And we have a camera and we zoom in on an audience member, and it has a little name of like, this is Brad, he's 29-year-old tradie. And me and Brad have a bit of banter and stuff like that. And it was a really fun way to bring that sort of reality TV into the comedy that we were doing. Yeah.
Alyce, your current show is most definitely 18 plus,
Yes.
but you have toured a different show,
Yes.
Billy's Backyard, for
Yes.
primary schools. Can you tell me a little bit about how you approach comedy writing for grown-ups versus for children?
Just less fart jokes. Billy's Backyard was, we had, so like the villain was called Queen Fart Pongy. And, you know, making kids laugh is just the best. And it was very pantomime-esque and it was very fun. And I guess I really take that same spirit into all of my writing. And I don't know, just build... I think it's about building things that repeatedly make people laugh, or, you know, bring that sort of nostalgic element into it that people can relate to. Like, Tinderella is very much about my story of being a prolific user of Tinder in regional Australia. Spoiler alert, got kicked off Tinder the other day, that's a whole other story. Yeah, I don't know, it's just about sharing my life story in a way that allows people to laugh at me and with me. Yeah.
Beautiful. And Dan, you were talking a little bit before about your early shows and how once you got off the stage, you didn't really have any recollection of what just transpired, other than generally whether it had went well or it hadn't. Is that still something that happens to you today, to this day?
Mostly I remember what I was talking about and the reactions to all my little bits and pieces like that, my pauses. And like I said, I think about what I'm going to do before I write it down. And I find if I get up and do 3 shows in a week and I do the same material each time, I'm going to say it differently every time. I'm going to change a word here or something like that. Subconsciously, I'm doing that just because that's how my brain said, this is how you're going to say this sentence today. Mostly it's the idea, and does that idea work, and how did that come together? Doesn't matter what 4 words I put before it, as long as the idea and the punchline is all there. So then I've got that, and I'm gauging the reactions to them, and then going, okay, I might swap out one joke, the next joke, for one further down and bring that one up, because they all sort of go around the one idea. Like I might do camping. So my jokes are very interchangeable. And so if I'm doing one show one night, I might do something here, next night I'll do it there. But getting that reaction, that feedback, then I can go back and I can self-evaluate and go, okay, it went really well tonight, and then 2 nights later, okay, it worked better when it was later on. So I sort of do that, and then, you know, a month later I'll sit down and reevaluate, take out something. And it's, as we were saying, the audience, how the audience reacts sort of guides how you're going to do something. So I did a show on a Friday night in Wodonga, and it was a crowd that just was there for comedy. They were ready to laugh and everything. It was a perfect night. I got off and then at the break I had people coming up to me and shaking my hand, and I was the first person on. The next night, did the same show again, same comedians and everything, but how the audience was reacting was, instead of the whole room laughing at once, some people over on the left were laughing, some people on the right were laughing then. So it threw off my breaks where I started the next stage, and that threw me off. So I'm doing 5 minutes, it turned into 10 because I'm like, but the gaps were too there, so the audience was getting bored and going, what's next?
So is that rather an intuitive process for you to figure out what's working and what's not, and then sort of say, for the next one, I'm going to just switch this around? Or are you taking notes and sort of evaluating, you know, all right, in a very real way, this is the set list, these are the things I'm going to swap, or are you sort of just sort of coming up with it in your head and going, all right, well, I might just tweak this one thing?
I'll usually run over my material before a show, during the day. You know, if I'm travelling, I'll go over it again. But when I get up on stage, that's when I'm like, there's my word vomit. It's just going to come out. My brain will do what it decides to do and goes, let's save this one first and see how that goes. And I find the best feedback is the audience as well, but afterwards, for your fine point comedy, for your words and your word economy, is the group of comedians that you're performing with, that you're interacting with. Afterwards, we might sit down, we're just having a drink, have a meal, we'll talk about it, and we are our own worst enemies. Because I'll get off stage and I'm like, I had a terrible night. And other people will come up and go, I loved everything you did, but you need to swap this word for that. And you might go along to the next show and you take that feedback from the other comedians, you change that word, suddenly it's a lot funnier, everyone's having a great time, and you're like, we're not trying to sabotage each other, we're trying to help each other, we're all trying to lift ourselves up because we're all sort of working towards, we want to make the crowd laugh. It's no good if we're saying, oh, you're terrible and you need to do something, or you shouldn't do this. We try and work on each other's material in a casual basis, just saying, have you tried this? Yeah.
It's kind of shot through with community spirit, like just giving each other tags and so on. And that even sort of strikes me as one of the key things about being in the comedic community, right? And Eden, you probably have that just with your writing partner, your brother, but Alyce, is that something that is in your world?
I try to, I guess because I work predominantly solo, and I don't do any of the open mic nights. Sorry to anyone that's here that's running the rooms at the moment. I try to see as much professional work as I can, because I find that really helpful. And then, you know, at the moment, because I'm touring, so when you're in a different room every night, you're always picking up new ideas, and I have been trying to utilise those ideas and bring them into my show at the moment from the audience, and they seem to be working most of the time. So yeah, I don't know, I think everything's an evolution and everything's a learning moment.
So we're coming close to time, but I did want to check in with the audience to see whether anyone has any burning questions. We've got a roving mic.
Nothing.
No one? I've got plenty more.
You've done a good job.
Yeah.
I've asked all the good ones. I did want to ask, what was the best piece of advice that you have ever gotten when it comes to writing comedy, or perhaps some advice that you might give to anyone in the audience who's interested in embarking on a career of comedy?
So, for me, it was just like good comedy is good storytelling, and good storytelling is having a good memory and remembering everything that happens to you. So my biggest bit of advice was just start writing down everything that happens to you. Have a little book, anything, all those really innocuous little things. And you'll notice in your group of friends, the person that's always like, oh, this, and you have those funny conversations, but then they're gone and they disappear. And it's not until you write little things down and you build on stuff. And it became really apparent to me when I was a big fan of Seinfeld, and I started delving into listening to sort of the behind the scenes stuff on the writers' rooms and everything like that. And I remember being absolutely amazed that nearly 95% of the stories in that show were things that actually happened to the writers.
Yeah.
And people aren't just picking funny ideas. There's a misconception that, oh, you just think of a funny thing out of the blue. But so much is like, no, I had this happen to me, or I had that conversation, and it's only because I sat there and wrote it down and built on it that it became something. And so it isn't this sort of magical thing. It's literally everyone has interesting things that happen to you, and it's only when you start writing them down and building on it that's when they start to become something. That would be
Yeah.
my big bit of advice.
Writing from lived experience.
Yeah.
Well, that's Tinderella, but a comedian told me once that to write out your material and then highlight every sort of punchline or every joke, and if there's not a joke every second line, rewrite it. Which is true, like, you know, it doesn't have to be a big laugh, but there has to be something
yeah.
in there, and especially if you can start layering a joke in that is really slowly building, but you're laying those like little Easter eggs constantly. And I think just reading things out loud. My thing is, if I can make a tech just have the tiniest chuckle, because the techs are the worst. Kofi, you're the worst. Like, to get them to laugh is just my absolute aim. If I can get the tiniest chuckle from a 50-minute show, if I can get one tiny chuckle out of them, I know I've got a good show.
Someone who's professional and is like their job is supposed to not be laughing.
But also they see so much, and and I don't know, you're just bored all the time? I don't know. Get Kofi up here and ask him why he doesn't laugh at my jokes.
And Dan, your piece of advice?
So I actually have two. One of them is from Dane, in Wagga. He runs the Riverina Comedy Club, and a lot of people come up to him after shows and goes, "I've always wanted to do comedy," and they're looking for advice, and he says, "Go to an open mic, practice beforehand, but tell the one story you know really well. Every Christmas you've got that one story that you'll tell, and it's just everyone laughs. You know the story back to front. It's grown over the years. Get up on stage and see if you can do that, because you know that in your head. You don't need notes. You don't need anything like that, which is really good for someone to get up and see if they can sort of handle the pressure of being in front of people, it's quite hard being under lights and doing that and trying to get that response. So having that story in your head that you already know is really good to rely on. My second piece of advice from me is that throughout the years I've learned that when you talk to different comedians and you ask them for advice, they'll tell you advice that sort of suits where they're at, not where you're at. So there seems to be sort of hard and soft rules for comedy, depending on where you are. There's some, like, you don't punch down, no one wants to break that. But then some people say, okay, in your first 10 seconds, you have to have a joke that everyone laughs at. That's great for when you're starting out, because you've only got 3 minutes. So you've got that 10 seconds is quite a bit of your show. But if you're working on an hour sort of thing, you can sort of take that time to tell a story, to interact with the audience. So my advice is sort of, if you're talking to someone and trying to ask for advice, understand where they're at. They might not see you're just beginning or you've been in there for a while. So try and find your place and what works for you.
Lovely. Well, as a huge comedy nerd, this has been really, really fun for me to be up here talking to all of you. I'm going to end tonight by just telling one of my favourite jokes by Mitch Hedberg. He says, "I write jokes for a living. I sit in my hotel at night. I think of something funny. Then I go out and get a pen and I write it down. Or, if the pen is too far away, I have to convince myself that what I thought of ain't funny." Everyone, please, a huge round of applause for Eden Porter, Alyce Fisher, and Dan Phillips. Thank you, everyone.